Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing once again a GTX 1060 3GB using the highest texture quality possible without taking into account HD texture packs that are downloaded separately. But compared to the previous video, I'm using 16GB of RAM on dual channel, running at 2666 MHz instead of 8GB, and on the processor, instead of an i3 8100, I'm using an i5 8400 because many of the games in the previous video were CPU limited as well, which made it very difficult to show you exactly the effects of going over the VRAM limit. So first of all, Forza Horizon 3, I'm using the maximum settings without any MSAA, and as you can see the textures are maxed out. In the previous video with the i3 and 8GB of RAM, the game just crashed. The system tries to compensate using the system RAM, which is slower than the VRAM on your graphics card. So in the previous video, when we ran out of VRAM and started using system RAM, we went to 8GB. The game tried to go over 8GB. There is when the page file just tries to take over to compensate for the lack of system RAM, and the game just crashed after less than 5 minutes of play. In this case, it was significantly different. Yeah, the frame rate was lowered compared to having lower texture quality options, but the game still worked with very variable frame times in certain places, which means that the game feels inconsistent, especially on the controls. You can really notice it, which makes just racing in this game very inconsistent and unreliable. So as you could see, the RAM usage is around 10GB. If you lower the texture quality plus the dynamic object option, it should be significantly better. I'll talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing Rise of the Tomb Raider, and on this one I'll be using high settings to get a decent frame rate plus the highest texture quality, which is what I'm trying to show you here, what happens if we go maximum textures. And this is one of those games that uses a lot of VRAM. In the previous video we had maximum RAM usage, maximum VRAM usage, and the game was around 30 to 45 frames per second, with some stutters here and there. In this case, something very similar happens. We still have a couple extra frames compared to the previous video, but as you'll see, the VRAM usage is high, so it tries to compensate with system RAM. And in this case, since we have more than 8GB, the RAM usage can go to around 10GB. But thankfully in this game, since we can just change the texture quality without having to restart, I'll just pause the game, lower the texture quality option from very high to medium, and once I go back into the game, you'll instantly see the difference. The frame rate will go from the 40s into the 60s, the VRAM usage will start being lowered, as well as the RAM usage. It goes below 8GB of usage. So yeah, since this game uses so much VRAM, it has to compensate so much that the frame rate is lower. That's because the system RAM used as VRAM is slower than using actual VRAM on the graphics card. Just lower the texture quality and you'll be fine. I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Lara, I'm sorry if Sophia was less than welcome.
I understand. I'm just glad you were there to vouch for me.
My people have spent decades fighting outsiders. It's not an easy habit to break. See if you can lend a hand with the preparations. A little hard work would go a long way towards building trust.
I'll see what I can do.
Now I'm testing Resident Evil 7, and on this one the options that give us the highest VRAM usage, first of all, are the texture quality, of course, as usual, and an option called Shadow Cache. So yeah, I just enabled those options in order to have the highest VRAM usage possible, and you'll notice instantly in the footage that the VRAM usage is around 3 GB. It's pretty much maxed out. The RAM usage is going over 8 GB, and there are some stutters every now and then when I'm just turning a corner, just walking around the house after you beat the first boss in the garage. And this one is not a huge deal if you ask me, but you can always lower the texture quality to medium and the game will run without any of the stutters shown in the video, but still you can once again notice that the system is trying to compensate using system RAM, so we go over 8 GB, but with lower texture quality we get lower VRAM usage, lower RAM usage, and the stutters just disappear. I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Heck of a thing, ain't it? Sure shit beats the hell out of dying. My little girl has given us a gift. And this gift is with me always. As you can see, the family is only part of her gift. Which is...
Now I'm testing Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and this game uses a ton of VRAM as well. By using the Ultra textures you get way over 4 GB of VRAM usage, and in this case, compared to the previous video, since we have a better CPU and more system RAM, the game doesn't stutter anywhere close like before. That's because we have extra system RAM to compensate for the lack of VRAM, and we also have a better CPU to handle all the stuff going on. So by just lowering the texture quality, you should have a higher frame rate plus less of the stutter that happens every now and then when going into a new area. So yeah, Deus Ex is running just fine compared to the previous video. I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Nic, co by stało za... Všichni augové si připraví doklady. Naturálové postupujte dál.
Nothing about the ship.
Mějte na paměti, že předměty týkající se augmentací, například biobaterie a jisté nástroje či další autorské příslušenství, mohou být během namátkových kontrol zabaveny. Děkujeme za spolupráci.
There is overall. Drag your ass. Just make sure no one comes through.
Now I'm testing Playerunknown's Battlegrounds, and on this one I'm using a mix between high and ultra settings with the foliage on very low. That helps with the visibility in the game to spot enemies and all that, and the textures will be maxed out. You'll see that the game is very close to maxing out the VRAM usage. It doesn't get to a point where it destroys the performance or makes the game use a ton of system RAM, so in this one it's not a big deal. It's closer to something like Resident Evil 7, where we get some big stutters every now and then, but since the system RAM is not maxed out anytime soon, I don't consider it a huge deal. If you want to avoid any stutters whatsoever, one of the big ones that lasts maybe a second, and you won't have any issues whatsoever. And now conclusion time. I won't be talking about the next games to PUBG. It doesn't make a big difference in performance. It's very similar to what's happening in this footage right now. Yeah, the VRAM usage is maxed out, the RAM usage is higher than it should be, but the game doesn't have any major issues, just some big stutters every now and then, plus a few less frames compared to using lower texture quality. Again, that's because the system RAM is not as fast as using the VRAM on your graphics card. That's why I always in my videos lower the texture quality anyways. You don't usually get a huge difference in visuals. Sometimes ultra textures versus high textures, there's not a massive difference that you can see while playing the game. Consider that personal preference. Of course, the newer games that will be releasing will be using more and more VRAM. For now, 3 gigs is still enough. You can lower textures just fine. If you have enough system RAM, you can still run the big majority of games. Even Forza Horizon 3, which is a VRAM hog. As you could see, we didn't hit 16 gigabytes of RAM usage. Still holds up. But again, it's compromise after compromise if you don't have enough VRAM, and it will get worse as time goes on, so that's something to keep in mind. If there is not a huge difference with a card that runs similarly like an RX 580 and it has more VRAM, I recommend you consider that if you care about the texture quality. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video, thanks for watching and see you next time.
Secure the area, keep the bombs protected. Op 4 has located a bomb. Plan your defenses accordingly.
Wall secured!
Shit device.
10 seconds to insertion. Down to 5 seconds.
Setting up.
Bomb located by Op 4.
Welcome mat deployed. Laying out the welcome mat.
One Op 4 remaining. Op 4 eliminated. Mission successful.
Frag out.
Take cover!
Can you hear me, Kumpa?
Got you, Lima Charlie.
There is a cartel supply convoy passing through the province soon. Capturing it would give my people much-needed supplies and restore their morale. Can you do this?
Consider it done.
Taking orders from Pat Qatari now?
Qatari needs this convoy. We are gonna give it to him. The more he depends on us to get shit done, the more we can get out of him in return. Ready? Fire, fire, fire!
Copy. I'm opening fire on these shitheads. We got more tangos coming in.
More Grand Guard soldiers. Lapdogs for the Duke.
Air feels heavy. Hard to get a good lungful.
What the boy just happened?
I told Miss Lucia Pastor that they wouldn't let us take...
At an station. This should take me out to the Institute.
No thanks, ma'am. That's not what I'm saying. Why do we even need Grand Guard personnel here?
AverMedia Institute has strategic value to the Duke's inner circle. That's all I was told. You know how it works.
You just carry out your orders. I get it. It seems weird. Sleepy little place like the Institute.
Maybe one of them two-penny drinks.
Blue-jawed hagfish. River crust is more like it.
That sounded like broken glass. What? Someone there?
Intruder!
Let's see. I'm with you. Come on, let's finish this. One of us is down. Somebody's down.